when you're working with AI, you're working at a more like atomic level in a way, validating what the genie is giving back to us. We can say like that word ballparky, right? That's not quite the right word. If you're in a room with an agency and they're just talking about ideas, you're never to get to that level of detail, right? And so it just kind of becomes a big abstraction, and I'm not saying that it's not possible. I'm sure people have done great work. It's just a different approach.
Are you a scaling SaaS founder? Ready to make the leap from leading a team to leading an organization? Join us each week as we refill your think tank with actionable tips and strategies from great business minds you know and those you don't know yet. This is SaaS Fuel with your host, 5-time entrepreneur, SaaS founder, and globetrotting adventurer, Jeff Maines.
Welcome back to the SaaS Fuel podcast, where the real therapy happens between school drop-offs, snack negotiations, and that magical moment when your kid makes eye contact and your heart does a cartwheel. I'm your host, Jeff Maines. I help B2B SaaS founders like you grow from traction to scale. Here, growth is more than just numbers. It's about crafting a future-proof company, premium valuation, and leaders who build a business of significance while living epic, adventurous lives. One of the most powerful therapists for a child with autism was already in the room. In this episode, we're diving into a radically human approach to autism therapy, one that flips the traditional model on its head by making parents the primary agent of change. Instead of relying solely on therapists or tutors, this parent-led method gives families the tools they need to integrate therapy into daily life, turning ordinary moments into powerful opportunities for growth. You'll hear how platforms like Happy Ladders are simplifying complex therapeutic strategies into actionable everyday routines so parents don't just feel included, they feel empowered. Who knew SaaS could do something this awesome? It's about moving from dependency to confidence, giving families a roadmap for consistent progress, even outside the clinic. But this episode isn't just about therapy, it's also about storytelling. We explore the Story Cycle Genie, an AI-powered tool designed to help brands articulate their vision clearly and authentically. Because whether you're helping a child learn new skills or building a business that makes a difference, the way you tell your story matters, like a lot. If you're passionate about innovation with heart, whether in healthcare, parenting, education, or brand building, this episode is packed with insights on how technology and human communication can work together to drive meaningful transformation. Let's dive in. Our expert guest last Thursday was David Ebner, the brand storyteller behind the best-selling book Kingmakers and founder of Content Workshop. David broke down how narrative, not noise, is the key to standing out in an AI-saturated world. From rebuilding trust to evolving SEO with substance, this episode is a roadmap to content that actually connects. And our founder last week was Jonathan Mast, who's trained over 100,000 entrepreneurs on using AI to simplify, not complicate their businesses. He revealed how clear prompts and intentional tools can unlock automation without losing your voice. If you're building systems and feel buried by tech choices, this one brings clarity. If you miss either episode, go check those two out. My guest today is Sean Schroeder, an entrepreneur, exited founder, and seasoned product strategist who spent his career building ventures that bridge digital innovation with human impact. He's co-founded multiple companies, including 2 digital agencies and 4 digital products, each shaped by his obsession with crafting user-centric experiences that truly solve problems. Sean's current work spans across Reventure Labs, an unconventional venture studio, Happy Ladders, a mobile platform for parents of children with developmental needs, and the Story Cycle Genie, which is a storytelling tool co-created with Park Howell of Business of Story. Park has been on the show before. Whether launching products or mentoring founders, Sean leads with empathy, clarity, and systems that scale. Welcome someone who blends story, strategy, and startup grit, Sean Schroeder. Hey, Sean, welcome to SaaS Fuel.
Hey, Jeff. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Well, you've launched and exited multiple ventures. It's a pretty cool background. What was the spark that led to Happy Ladders, and how is it different from anything you've built before?
Previous endeavor really focused around content. It was a content management platform. Essentially started out as one, ended up becoming more of a buyer enablement platform over the years, and introduced personalization and everything. And my wife has been in the autism services space for a very long time, her whole career. And so, for years, she had a really interesting evolution from kind of a very conventional approach, which was very in-home based, to a parent-led approach where she was essentially leveraging parents as the therapist within her practice. And so listening to her talk about things over the years, I always wanted to do something with her. I was like, man, you have like a really cool approach. Like, I feel like I need to build an app for this, to kind of codify it
Yeah.
and make, and make it something that can be applied very easily and repeatedly. Right. And so I finally talked her into it on a long walk one day, and she agreed to indulge me. And so we put our heads together and built Happy Ladders.
That's very cool. Well, from a parent's perspective, what's the biggest shift they experience when using the platform versus other developmental tools or services, or kind of the traditional approach?
Yeah, well, I'm not the autism expert, so I'm going to give you my best my best approach.
Sure.
But basically, in a traditional model, the parents are kind of left out of the process in a way, right? That people have. I'm not saying this is right or wrong. There's many different ways to solve this problem, but a lot of the what we used to call the tutors, the RBTs as they call them today, come in and they work with the kids directly, right? And the behavior consultants come and work with the kid, but the parents aren't always there. Sometimes they even leave, right? Or they go there in another room, or whatever, doing their thing. So they're kind of left out of the process. The therapist comes in, does their work for a couple of hours or 8 hours, whatever it is, however as long they are scheduled to be there. And so the problem that Amy was solving was there's a lot of other friction that comes part of that. One, like, your parents are with you 24/7, right? So the parents are able to teach all day, every day, right? Tutors are only there, or RBTs are only there, the time that they're there. And once they go, and if they're not
That makes
sharing
sense.
that knowledge, and the parent's not integrated in that process, then that knowledge goes away, right? So the parent they're not really integrated into the process. And so it does two things. One, it doesn't allow them to learn how to teach their children when the therapist isn't there. It also, makes it so that it almost creates like a learned dependency on the tutors, right? Rather than having the parents integrated into the process and feeling empowered to do something when the the RBTs aren't there. And so this parent-led approach, Amy breaks it down, so it's very, very simple. So literally anyone can do it. And we're talking about kids that are in the 0 to 3 range developmentally, right? And so we're doing things like strategic peekaboo. This isn't complicated stuff, right? And then the difference is that in a traditional model, sometimes they'd have like parent training, and they come in and they give this huge brain dump to the parents. They're like, hey, we're going to teach you all about applied behavior analysis. And they get deep into the weeds, and parents are like, man, I can barely keep it together. There's no way, I'm going to process and understand all these things, let alone generalize it and apply it, in my life. Like, there's a huge disconnect there. And so basically what Amy did was she distilled it all down to very little things. So we don't ever try to teach the parent the behavioral principle or the developmental skill principle. We just say, do this, play peekaboo with your kid. Here's how you do this, right? And it's very targeted. It's designed to target very specific skills. So, but the parents don't have to know what exactly the reasoning is behind it or how it works. They just have to do it. And what we found is that when parents do that, they get some good momentum, and then they actually do become curious about why it works, right? And so it's this way to get them started without overwhelming them. And so we just start very, very small. And some parents never do. They never get curious. They're like, whatever, my kid's gaining skills, and that's all I really care about. And this allows me to do
They just want to do the thing.
Yeah, it's like, I got a life. I'm trying to do other things. I don't necessarily need to become an expert, but I do need my kid to continue to develop skills and fulfill their potential, right? And so that's kind of the big transformation there.
That's awesome. I like that it's very outcome based. It's really getting what is the result, and here's how you get that result. You don't need all the theory. You don't even know how to build a watch. You just want to know what time it is, and you give that to them. And I think that's really cool.
Yeah, 100%.
And Happy Ladders, you're building inside Reventure Labs, which has a pretty unorthodox model as well. I mean, how do you describe it to somebody who's never heard of a venture studio before?
That's a great question, Jeff. I'm not sure. I had to do a fair amount of research before I even decided to call it a venture studio to figure out if that was the right term. But it feels like it's generally the right term. And so the idea is that, so me and my longtime business partner, Matt Levine, we started our little web agency back in 2001 together, and we've been working together ever since. He's more technically inclined founder, and so we've built a lot of stuff together. I started out as a designer, and so we would start building websites. And I was designing and doing HTML and front end stuff, and he was doing all the back end stuff, right? So good partnership, but we kind of still function that way today, even though I don't really do design anymore. But we basically said, okay, well, we're really good at building stuff. We don't necessarily want to be investors in that way, like financially, right? We don't want to invest in that way. What we would like to do is like partner with people like we do with Park Howell, where we say, hey, we have someone who has a framework, they have an audience, they provide thought leadership. These are, Park is he's a real like thinker in his space, right? And I know this because I've worked with him, and that's kind of how the whole vibe branding thing like kind of evolved. Different story, but the whole idea was like, hey, if we could partner with people that have an audience, people that have taken the time to build this thing, and they have their own specialization that we can lean into, and they're also not technically inclined, or they don't necessarily want to get an investment, then maybe we can provide that investment. Maybe we can make that a technical investment into what they're doing. And so the whole Story Cycle Genie thing with Park Howell was based on that idea that we're going to bring technical capital, not actual capital, to the table to try and build something.
No, that's awesome. And tell me a little bit more about that. I mean, I think that that's a brilliant way to bring something to the world. You said co-develop Story Cycle Genie with Park. He's been on the show. It's been a while since he was on. So how does Story Cycle Genie tap into a brand's vibe in a way that typical brand discovery sessions just don't ever get to?
Actually, I should ask a question. I'm assuming you've done this before, but have you ever worked with a branding agency or marketing agency and they come and they go, okay,
yes.
We're going to define your brand and we're going to go through this big process. It's very impressive. And they ask you to do things like, what if you were a car, what car would your brand be?
Right.
Questions like this. And they're very abstract. And we did it a couple times. And I think the last time we did it at my previous business, because we were really struggling, which is how we ended up working with Park. But going back to that whole idea is like building something is easy in a lot of ways, and probably oversimplifying, but talking about it is really hard, right? And so trying to find that, so going through that process of going through these abstract exercises that could take weeks or months to get something, and then you get this final thing like, hey, we did it, here's your brand, right? And you go, okay, now what? Like, I don't know what to do.
Exactly. Right? Like, I'm not sure if that's really it or not, but you delivered it to me, so I guess.
You don't know if it's right. You're like, I guess it's. I don't know. They're the expert. I'm just an entrepreneur. I'm just a builder. But what the heck do I know about this stuff, right? So that kind of led us down that path of the vibe branding idea, right? Which is what we built Story Cycle Genie for, which leverages Park Howell's Story Cycle system, his 10 element framework, which I worked with Park many years ago at the previous business, trying to figure out, we were trying to come up with a unified story for we had a product and we had services, right? And they were very, very different. And they were kind of like they're like at odds with each other in a way, because we're trying to be a SaaS business, trying to provide a lot of value, for the product that we deliver. On the other hand, we have the professional services who we're trying to build as many hours as possible for the most amount possible, right? So these are two completely opposite ideas. And so we're trying to figure out, like, how do we do this? And so we started working with Park, and it was the same thing, where we went through this very long process. It literally took us months to come up with, the through line for our brand story, which was, flow, right? And so I went down to spent 6 hours with Park and his on. We did the same thing, and we just talked for 6 hours about trying. And I'm correct. And he's going, so it's like this. I'm like, no, it's not like that. He goes, okay, it's like this. No, it's not like that. And we did round and around for 6 hours. And finally, meeting was over. We left. And then a few weeks later, he came back and he's like, okay, I got it. What do you think about this? And I was like, oh, that's actually really good. That does make a lot of sense. There's this whole like flow concept, from Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, the, flow state researcher. And I was like, I really like that, because it really does speak to what we are actually trying to do at an organizational level. Like whether it's professional services or whether it's our product, that is the thing that we're trying to create for our customers. And so I was like, okay, that's awesome. Yeah. But, so the process worked. We got a great output, but it was a long, convoluted process. right? And it took me, again, I had to fill out multiple PDFs for Park. There's so much discovery involved in order to get to the point where he had something to work with that, man, it is expensive and it took a really long time, right? At the end, I'm happy to make the investment and it was well worth the money. It certainly helped us understand how to think about our business and communicate that throughout our company, not just with marketing or sales, but how do we think about product? How do we think about customer service? How do our project managers think about how they relate to our customers when we're working on a custom dev project, right? So it was great because it infused our whole organization and really provided that North Star that we needed, that we're really struggling with, right? Instead of just being like, hey, we're going to make you more efficient and save you money. We were able to
Right. Everybody says that.
Yeah, exactly, because that's what everyone wants, right? I mean, that's the commodity of what any business is, right? We're trying to do that, right, in some way. So with Park, we took his story cycle system and essentially made an AI agent that goes through his system. We had him vet it, and that was kind of one of the benefits of working with a domain expert, was that we could go through and it's like, I'm like, I don't know, you tell me, Park, is this good? Is this output actually working for you? Is it following the structure that you want? He also has what he refers to as like the ABT, the and, but, therefore, DNA of storytelling framework, right? Which is super cool, but it sounds really simple, but it's actually, there's a little bit more there than is on the surface. And so getting the agent to output it in a very specific way, took a little bit of more work than I expected, honestly, because I didn't think it'd be that hard. But, AI likes to do its own thing sometimes. So it's like, you feel like you become like an agent tamer, sometimes, rather than someone's actually building stuff. Like in the old days, you just build stuff. You're like, oh, I got an error. It didn't work, and so you just keep banging on it. Now it's like, I don't know. We might give it to you most of the time.
It works 80% of the time.
Exactly.
It's a probability. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And so different paradigm, but that allowed us to embed his domain expertise and his framework into an agent that would go through that process for you. And how it works is, instead of going through that long discovery process and essentially outsourcing your brand story to through another organization. So if we pick Audi, as our car that our brand is like, that's Audi has their own brand story, right? So we're essentially co-opting their brand story and trying to make it ours, which maybe one of the reasons why sometimes it doesn't feel authentic or genuine, right? Because it's not really ours. We're just kind of borrowing it to make it ours. And what Park System does allows you to authentically create your brand story without leaning into these other metaphors and trying to borrow from other brands in order to create your brand story. And so the process starts out with doing a very short discovery where we just simply analyze your website. At minimum, if you want to upload a couple documents, some really great things, you say, hey, this really speaks to what we're doing and what we're about, then we can use those too, right? But it starts there, and then it basically does an assessment, says, okay, cool, here's how I understand your brand. And at that point you can say, yeah, it's accurate, it's not accurate. If it's on target, cool, we're gonna go ahead and automate the whole brand story creation process for you and create a draft, because we know enough that we can do something with it, right? If it's not good enough, then we go, okay, cool, no problem, we're gonna take you step by step through it, and you tell us what's right and what's wrong, so that when we get to the end of this process, it's going to be nails either way, right? So whether we do quickly create a draft and then you go back and edit that draft, or you go through it step by step, either way, we're still going to end up with a quality output, and that becomes the foundation for literally everything else.
Right. I mean, all the marketing, everything is really built on that brand story.
100%.
And if you don't have that right, then I think it's just like being off 1 or 2 degrees. The further you go, the further off course you are.
Yeah, for sure. There's another product out there that does a similar thing. It's more marketing focused, right? But they basically ask you to give us all your stuff, and then we analyze it, and then we tell you, we look at your design standards, we look at your editorial guidelines, we look at all these things, and then we tell you, and then we go, okay, cool, that becomes our body of our work. But if all of those things are slightly off, if they haven't been vetted as like, I don't know, man, it just feels like you're going to end up slightly off. You know what I mean? And it's kind of like, like you're saying, it's like if you're off 2 degrees here, by the time, it's kind of like a baseball or something, right? If you're off when a pitcher throws the ball, if they're off this much here, by the time it gets to the plate, it's going to be off a foot. And I feel like if you don't start with something solid like a brand story that really is nails, then you're kind of exposing yourself to to the opportunity for that to happen.
And is that kind of where you have the idea? You mentioned it a little earlier about vibe branding. I mean, it
Mm-hmm.
seems like it kind of changes the way that the founders would even think about storytelling and customer residence because it is the foundation. And
Yeah.
that's the piece we've got to get right in order to build all of these other assets instead
Yeah.
of build a whole bunch of stuff and then go figure out who we are.
Yeah. That's exactly right. Instead of, you know, sitting in a meeting with the founders or the founders and their first marketing hire or whatever and trying to figure it out for days or weeks on end to try and get something for them to actually execute on, the whole vibe part of it is that it's extracting that information out of the founder or whoever the person is that's using it, right, as it goes. So as it's kind of like self-correcting so that when you get to the end, it's going to be good, and it's going to be authentically what you think. And, that's the great part of it, because a lot of these things, founders move very quickly and they've moved, I'm building this thing 3 weeks ago, but I've kind of forgotten about that now. That's just sort of the bedrock that I've laid. And now I'm over here on this other thing. And they have a lot of knowledge that's baked in that may not be service level. So what we're trying to do is pull that stuff that's not service level out, that maybe they forgot maybe they evolved how they talk about what they're building, what they're creating, what the value is they're creating for, the audience that they're building it for. So that's kind of the big idea, is that we're trying to extract that business intelligence out of people so that you can create something authentic without having to go through this laborious and time consuming and often expensive process.
Expensive. That's the big one, especially when you start talking branding
Yeah.
and then the results. Do they work? Do they not? Does it fit? Did you don't know, but if you're part of really creating it and understand the why behind it, and you're involved in that iterative process like that, I think that you get a lot better results a lot faster.
Yeah, and I think it's possible because when you're working with AI, you're working at a more like atomic level in a way, validating what the genie is giving back to us. We can say like that word ballparky, right? That's not quite the right word. If you're in a room with an agency and they're just talking about ideas, you're never to get to that level of detail, right? And so it just kind of becomes a big abstraction, and I'm not saying that it's not possible. I'm sure people have done great work. It's just a different approach.
Yeah, yeah. And we'll flip that on the other side. AI can generate hundreds of brand messages in minutes. I mean, how do you maintain authenticity and emotional connection in that process? Have you built that in there, or how does that work?
Oh, well, that's literally the whole point of Park's system, right? Is to have that emotional component built in there. So when you identify your audiences as part of your brand story, you look at their challenges, fears, frustrations, and aspirations, right? And that's a point where, I think that founders especially, or anyone who works deeply, within a business, it could be a salesperson, right? Because they're talking to people day in, day out about what their customers' pain points are and what their aspirations are, right? What they're actually trying to do. And so you're getting to that level of detail right there in your brand story. But what we do with the platform is we don't stop there. We actually, that's just the first step in the process. What we do is we take that brand story and we go, okay, well, cool, you've identified your three audiences, right? So let's dig a little bit deeper, right? Because this is just scratching the surface, really, of what we're talking about with your audience. So we're actually going to take that same narrative cycle, the story cycle system, and we're going to apply that to every single audience. Part of your building your brand story is determining, what your different brand archetypes are, right? And there are 12 main archetypes, and each one of those has, was it five? I think they have five more under each of those. So you basically have like 60 archetypes that, you can use to help orient your brand, right? Which is super helpful because we get to a fair amount of nuance at the brand story level with that, right? But when you go down a little bit deeper to the audiences, now that might shift a little bit, right? So if you have a primary archetype with two subtypes, you these might flip, right? So you might have like your primary archetype might be, say, the explorer or whatever, but the subtype, depending on the audience, could shift a little bit, and because this is all based on them, right? And how you want to communicate with them, how you want to solve problems for them. And so we create these audience stories, we break those out into their each individual audience stories, right? Which includes much more detail about these things. These aren't, typical like B2B personas. We're adding, more like jobs to be done kind of details in there, or, whatever. They get those things get pretty detailed, and sometimes they go a little too detailed, in my opinion. But so we're trying to stay, reasonably high level in order to get to the next step, but still providing that enough detail that we can do something meaningful. Because at the end of the day, all these things that we talk about all inform word choice, right? How do we communicate with
Right.
this audience, right? And one of the things that coming from a design background is, and I've always been loved like writing and stuff, but I ended up cheating more towards the design thing, got my, degree in design and everything. And so I was always focused on like, well, what visually can we communicate? Right. And I always, back in the day when they had like really horrible websites, you'd always check out, like, there'd always be those threads like, look at this website, it's horrible.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
And yet it's outperforming everything. And I was always like, how is that even possible? It's like, it just didn't make sense to me until I started digging into like CRO a little bit and looking at like, oh, like actual words matter,
Yeah.
and they matter a lot. And so when we're informing how to create the words that we use in all these different brand communications, this is super important stuff to get right. And so the next step in our process is you create a content playbook, which is essentially this beast of a content strategy that for every single audience that you're given to, in our case, we start with 3, right? It goes through all of those audience stories and then creates essentially a strategy for each one of those, going down to taking, your brand archetype information, their challenges, fears, frustrations, and then adapting those to channels, right? So how do we approach it when we talk to this audience on X? How do we do it on Instagram? How do we do it on our blog? Right? These are all considerations. These are all things that we think about and really try and capture that nuance, because that's going to provide, that content playbook is going to provide, it's like the Bible of your efforts from here on out. Everything, this is like your brand story basically operationalized. Like here it is, here's the blueprint, here's how we're going to execute and operationalize our brand story. It's all right here, right? Then from there, you can create customer journeys, you can create campaigns, and then social media strategies also, but they all flow downstream from the content playbook. Or if you just want to go create content straight from there, you can do that too. So it kind of depends on what your needs are at the moment, but essentially it's this big ecosystem of specialized agents that use that content playbook once we get through that process to do everything.
Yeah, so ready to future proof your company and scale to new heights? Dive into the ultimate resource designed just for SaaS founders and C suite executives. Champion Leadership Group gives you an unfair advantage in scaling up revenue and outwitting competitors. Imagine solving your biggest scaling headaches and hitting 5, 10, 20 million ARR and beyond with ease. We take away the guesswork and the grunt work and replace it with framework by supporting you with our on demand fractional C suite team, a powerful operating system built into software, and a thriving community of fellow scaling SaaS founders. That's how we make it happen. If you're stuck at your current revenue level, this is your ticket out. Feel like your company is the world's best kept secret? We amplify your success. And hey, if you're already crushing it but too busy to breathe, we got your back. We'll free up 20% of your time in the first month. Now is the time to upgrade from traction to scale. If you're ready to work smarter and not just grind harder, schedule a 10-minute growth brainstorm. Completely free, not a sales call. You can't buy anything on there. And we will pinpoint the number one thing blocking revenue. Visit championleadership.com. That's where leaders evolve and companies transform. I think more companies would do better if they would actually take the time on the front end to really work on that. And it's kind of like, just for the audience, a lot of developers, if you go straight to building stuff, one, if you're solo, maybe you can do that because it's in your head or that kind of thing. But if you're really building something for an audience, for an ideal client, actually having those conversations, and you probably spend 2 or 3 or maybe 10 times as much time in the kind of the design phase, or really figuring out what is it we're going to build, than you do just actually the build time. The building is the easy part because you've got the design and you've spent so much time there. And I think the same thing is true of marketing. The more time we spend in getting the design right and not like the colors and fonts and stuff like that. I mean the overall marketing plan, the way we're going to market, the brand story, to having all of those things together. And the more time we spend getting that right, the easier it is to create all of the other stuff around it, instead of just going and building a bunch of stuff and then having somebody go and they're like, I saw this company over here. Is that the same company as this? Because they don't make this, they don't look the same. Or see you at an event, like, wait, is that the same company? Because the messaging's different.
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess I would be one of the builders that would be like, I'm not going to spend that time planning because I just want to build stuff. Like I already know what problem I'm
I
trying
think
to
we
solve.
all want to do that. That's
And
why we're
I'm
entrepreneurs.
jumping in feet first, and I don't really care. I'm going to throw caution to the wind, and I'm just going to go build. Right?
Yeah, I
Uh,
just want to build cool stuff.
yeah, exactly.
I
But
get
but
it.
but here's the thing, though, Jeff, is that like you know stuff, right? You've built 5 businesses, right? So if you go and you say, I have an inclination, I want to go build something now, it's not like you're doing it uninformed. You have all this data, you have all that's baked into you, right? And so one of the things that I found fascinating, there's this Marines research article or study that they did, not even just an article, they did a whole study, it was like almost $4 million, where they were basically trying to figure out how decision making happens, right? And is intuition magic, or is it really rapid, high velocity pattern recognition? And what they found was it's the latter, right? So when we say we're going to build stuff, I mean, we're not doing it from scratch. No, we're not just like, it's not just one idea. It's like we're taking everything we've done up to that point in time that is like become a part of us that we may even not even know is there, right? Until someone says the right words to us, right? And suddenly we'll just go into excruciating detail about about one thing, right? Because that's who we are. And so what we're trying to do and through this process is to pull that out of you, right? We're trying, and that goes back to my cognitive mesh architecture, which is, part of that is the UX, right? And trying to create a very flow enabled process, right? Where it's hitting the right beats in terms of maintaining your cognitive flow, right? And so that might mean working quickly at some points, but also maybe backing off at other points and going, okay, well, actually, this is one of the interesting things that I've found in building this framework is that when I hate typing, I'm horrible at typing. I typo all over the place, and thank God for AI for that, right? Um,
Yes.
but it also takes time, and maybe it's my ADHD or whatever, but I just get very impatient. I'm like, I don't even have time to type, right? And so one of the things that we did for a UX convention in Story Cycle Genie and part of our framework is creating just buttons like, hey, here are your next steps. I created, like I mentioned before, the no dead ends framework, right? So it's always giving you things to do. And what I found is that really helps you think faster and think more clearly and get to that next idea faster rather than getting bogged down in some of the details of the previous step, right? And so what we're trying to do is by having that baked in there and facilitating that is to pull that information that you have in you as a founder, right? People know stuff, they do,
Yeah.
right? And we just have to provide a forum for them in order to extract it. And so that's the mission, is to try and do that. And I feel like we've done that. It may not be, it's not perfect, certainly not. It's a work in progress, as everything is, but it's pretty cool. And I've found it to be tremendously helpful in just creating the framework itself. Like as I started figuring out what patterns that I was using, because I didn't start with a plan, Jeff, when I built the Genie. I was barely even knew AI, right? I was like, this is the only thing, I'm just going to go. I don't even care. The first thing was, will it work? Can I actually generate an output that Park Howell says, hey, that's pretty good, right?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
step one. I was like, hey, we did it. Okay, cool. And then it was like, Park's like, hey, this is pretty neat. Can we create a base to like see what people think about it? I was like, yeah. Let's do that. And we take the next step. And he goes, and I'm a big fan of professor at Stanford. He wrote the book, is it Albert Savoy? I can't remember. Wrote the book called The Right It. Are you familiar with it?
No, I'm not. I'll have to check that out.
It's all about like testing business ideas, right? Before you actually invest time building them. Super cool. It's an easy read, really interesting, great, but one of my favorites. But so, one of the things that, as you know, is like trying to get people to part with their money is the hardest thing. It's like lots of people tell you lots of things about how much they love your product. When you show it to them, when you tell them the idea, they're like, yeah, Rob, but will they actually spend money? So our first test was like, we're going to charge people, a decent chunk of change to see if they are actually, how interested they are in this, right? And if it fails, like, who cares? We're not trying to make money. We're trying to test the hypothesis here, right? And so that was the next step in the process, was to do that. And we ran a little pilot, and and it was successful enough that we're like, okay, well, cool. People seem to like this. We got some great feedback, some great testimonials. And so like, okay, cool. And I was like, well, I'm gonna go build. Here we go. Right. And so I just started building, and it's like, oh, but now I need this. Like, I don't really like the way this works. I wish it did this instead, and so I was working with Matt, my partner, who built Brightsea.ai, which is the platform that the Story Cycle Genie is built on, which is what he refers to as a collective intelligence platform, which is basically, agent orchestration and different things built into it. Super cool, super powerful platform. And so I was building on top of Brightsea and thinking, and I could be going back to Matt going like, hey, can we do this? Hey, like, I don't really like the way this works. Can we do this? So we're just kind of iterating the platform and the product all at the same time. And, it got to the point where, as we got down the road, as I started, I was like, man, what did I do here? I made some decisions along the way for specific reasons. Again, I couldn't articulate them to you, but they were there for reasons, right? Having spent a lot of time doing UX, I'm making UX decisions along the way. I'm not planning it out. I'm not thinking like, oh, all right, I gotta, buttons got to be this size and they got to be placed here and all these things. I'm not thinking about that stuff at all. I'm just rolling. Right.
Right.
But when I went back and looked at everything, I was like, I feel like there's something here. So, again, using AI to kind of like identify the patterns, and then I would validate and say like, yeah, actually that is a pattern. Okay, cool. And then I realized it's like, oh, I built a thing. Like, look at this. This is an actual framework that I built on accident. It wasn't real on accident because I knew what I was doing. But again, it didn't start with a plan. And so I think sometimes starting with a plan can be overrated because it doesn't really free you to just go build, and indulge yourself. I mean, some of the most creative, interesting problems that I've seen solved, are done in a way that you just let someone go, right? They just go loose and let them wrestle with it, and they figure it out, and they're like, cool, look at what I did. And you're like, yeah, it's awesome.
As with the Story Genie, you're getting the information out of the founder's head. You're really building that. You've got the strategy, and then execution is where all the gold is.
100%.
And you mentioned it briefly, the cognitive mesh architecture. Walk us through the four pillars and how they anchor everything together from strategy to execution.
Yeah, for sure. And I apologize if I'm going to try and stay high level here because, like I said, I just finished writing the white paper and I haven't published it yet. So I'm like super deep in the weeds here. So I'm going to try and do it in a way that makes sense. So the four pillars are governance, right? One of the things that I pulled out of my hat from my previous work as a developer was the whole idea of one thing I used to use all the time back in the old days was server side includes, right? Because I hated doing things twice. And so I was like, well, I need to do the same thing with my agents. I have this whole orchestration of agents, but they really need to have this governance layer where this is how you work. These are every single one of you needs to do this, right? This is how I want you to function.
Yeah,
right?
These are all the rules.
Yeah, these are the rules of engagement. So we're going to start there. So governance was the very first pillar, right? We wanted to create consistent behaviors. And going back to that Marine study was, they figured out that we can identify 50,000 patterns in 3 to 5 seconds.
Wow.
Right? That's what intuition is, right? When we talk about, rapid pattern recognition, that's what we're talking about. And so having this shared library allows us to tap into those things in a very deliberate way. Right. And so that because their whole goal of the Marines research was to see okay, well, if we know that's the thing, how can we do it again? How can we repeat those conditions? Right. And so the governance layer is the first part of that condition, creating these stable working conditions, because I forget what the term that they use is, but if you have one of the key elements that they found that you need to have in order to compound this intelligence is consistent conditions. Right. So everything is where it works in a consistent manner. So there are no surprises. So one of the analogies that would be a pilot goes into a cockpit, they need to know where everything is. Right. If you move it, if you change it, that's a much different experience and probably a much different flight than you thought you were getting. Right. And so the governance layer provides that. It provides that cockpit with everything where it should be, so that as a user, you know what to do, you know what to anticipate. And so that helps us unlock that flow, concept, right? So because we've done that, and now we've reduced the cognitive load in that way, we can do these other things, right? So that's pillar one, governance. Pillar two is, the embedded intelligence. as I call it, which is essentially the swarm of specialized agents. And the Genie, we have, up to like 30 agents that all do different things. They all have very specialized tasks. They've all, been created to do a very specific thing, but, they have access to interact with each other. And that is the next pillar, which is the orchestration layer, right? So there are two ways that we do that. We do it, one, by allowing the agents to delegate to other agents. So for instance, when we're creating a brand story, we have what's called the brand intelligence Genie, right? The first step is doing the assessment of your brand. So what it does is it delegates to the brand intelligence Genie, which has been designed to go do basically brand research, for you. And it can do it for you, or it can do it for you and your competitors, right? So it goes out, pulls this out, and then it pulls that back to the brand story Genie, and then it continues its work. The other way that we do that is when you get to the end of the brand story process, for example, it's a brand story, you're like, yeah, man, that's great. Awesome. I'm ready for the next step, which is creating your audience stories. So there's a button, we provide a button for you to do that. We go, cool, let's do that. And what that does is then we create a handoff. And what that does is that creates on the fly a contextual prompt to hand off context to the next agent, so that the orchestration is very seamless, the user experience is very seamless. So you don't have to go like, okay, now I'm in this agent over here, and I got to tell it all these things that I just did over here. Or maybe I'll copy the brand story and paste it in there, and that'll give it its context. Right. But even that, is a pain in the butt. And so we provide those handoffs to provide context as you transition from one agent to the next. And so you can kind of move around the mesh, right, from agent to agent, and we're always providing context. We're either delegating to another agent, or we're handing you off to another agent with context. So that's the orchestration layer or pillar. The last one is the collective intelligence ecosystem. And what this is like every asset you create is created with specific metadata associated. So we know that what agent created it, we know the person who created it, right? This is basic stuff. But we also add other things. So when you get down the line, say creating a blog post, we're also documenting, we're auto tagging it. We're documenting what was the strategy that it came from. Like there's these threads that are part of this intelligence ecosystem that all kind of connect to other content pieces. So you have this, so the content itself, they used to refer to as intelligent content. I'm referring to this as ultra intelligent content because it's kind of expanding that basic idea of intelligent content, which has semantic intelligence built into it, so that we're building out this, we're amplifying doing, what do we call it? Cognitive extension, right? So we're taking all the stuff that we pulled out of you as a founder. We built your brand story. Now it's infused in all this content that you're creating, whether it's for marketing, whether it's for sales, whether it's for customer service, whether it's for investors. Doesn't really matter, right? Because we're operationalizing it and adding all this rich semantic data. So that's the fourth pillar, the collective intelligence ecosystem.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, thank you. It was pretty fun to work on.
Yeah.
You can tell I get very excited about it.
So what would be the first step for a founder to actually put this to work and use it?
When you say this, are you referring to the Story Cycle Genie, or are you referring to the framework?
Really, the framework.
The framework.
And we'll add that'll be the next question about the Story Cycle Genie, but definitely the framework. How would they put the framework into practice? What would be like the first step?
The first step is, we have in the white paper a little section on sort of like a readiness assessment, right? To figure out like, does this make sense for us? Like before anything, let's just make sure that it makes sense for us.
That's a really good starting point.
Right?
Should we even do this?
Yes. Yeah. And so that's kind of the first step, is figure out like, okay, well, what are our goals? What are we trying to do? What do our processes look like? What expertise do we have in order to contribute to the system, right? And are they available, right, to use? So that'd be the first step. The next step is kind of like how I built the Story Cycle Genie. We started with one thing. It was like, hey, we're going to take this framework and we're going to create one asset. Out of this framework, we're going to create one thing, right? And then from there, you go, oh, okay, well, what's the next thing? What do we need to do with this asset, right? So it could be, maybe in a medical context, you're looking at a single patient record. I don't know. I'm just spitballing here. But, you go, okay, cool. Well, we've collected all this information about this patient record, right? And now what are we going to do with it? It's like, oh, well, we need to, I don't even have an example, but it's like you have that next step in the process where you're like, Now what do we do with this? We have this really great, data point or collection of data points in this one document. What do we do with it? In our case, the Story Cycle Genie, we go, cool, well, we're going to pull out 3 pieces of that, and we're going to use that to create 3 new documents, right? 3 new assets. And then we start building out that ecosystem, that intelligence ecosystem is starting to build. So it doesn't have to be done like, oh, I got to think of everything. It's like you could literally start with one job. So we're going to do this. We're going to create this one thing. And then from that thing, what do you want to do with it? Do we want to pull something out like we do with the Genie? Do we want to transform it in some way, right? Do you want to create a strategy out of it? Do you like, what is it? Depends on what the mission of the business is.
I like that. There's not just one path, but it's start with one thing and see where it goes from there, which I think really kind of fits into the whole idea of vibe branding
Yeah,
is
100%.
really starting with something, and then what's the next thing and the next thing, and you're kind of seeing where you end up
Yep.
based on each of those iterative steps.
Yeah, 100%. That's actually a great observation.
Well, for early stage founders, maybe using vibe branding to accelerate clarity, how do they do that if they haven't necessarily nailed product market fit yet? Can they still use the Story Sales Genie
Yeah,
or
no,
Story Cycle Genie?
yeah, Story Cycle Genie. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, because at the end of the day, like every founder starts with a mission, right? They have a
Yeah,
reason for starting. What is that reason? And who are those audiences? This doesn't mean your brand story, once you do it, doesn't mean it can't evolve. In fact,
exactly.
it should evolve as you learn more. And that's kind of the whole point of the intelligent, ecosystem is that things you're going to learn stuff as you go. So, well, let's go back and let's update our content playbook. I do this all the time, actually, with the Genie. Is it's telling me stuff, and I'm like, no, that's horrible. Let's not do that. And then I say, okay, now save this back to the content playbook so that it never happens again. Or I
Yeah,
tell it to save, in the memory of the system, or whatever makes sense, at the time. So but all that stuff you can, if it evolves and you add that information back in there, now that new information can cascade back down to the other assets as things evolve. And that's kind of the beauty of the system, is that it really is this living, breathing ecosystem, of assets. And I have done this over and over again while building out my white paper for the cognitive mesh architecture, right? I started with 3 pillars, actually. And, as I got it, I was like, oh, I forgot about that one thing. And so I was like, well, shoot, one thing that I kind of overlooked was what role memories play within Brightsea, because you can have memories for the user, you can have memories for the agent, and you can have memories for the team. And the team-based memories can be very powerful, because now as people add this stuff in there, they go like, oh, cool. So now you're adding these little ad hoc rules and adjustments to things as you go, but all that stuff can cascade back down to the system, right? To all the different assets and everything. And so I've refactored that white paper several times now based on new ideas. And I go, oh, and I actually have a more foundational document, which I call is like the technical spec, right? So as I think of something that I forgot, I go like, okay, now I got to think about that. Let's brainstorm. Let's figure out how we're going to talk about that. Now I got to work that back into the technical spec. It
yeah,
gets back in there. And then I go, okay, now update the white paper based on the technical spec. Right. And it goes, and then like if I'm just getting ready to start my own Substack. So I have a Substack campaign or plan to release my white paper, right? That was built by the Genie. So now I got to go like, okay, well, I got that back in there, and I got to be like, okay, now go look at the white paper, and I need you to infuse this new stuff from the white paper back into my Substack post that I'm going to do. So, really, like I said, it really is like a living, breathing ecosystem, and starting with it, is just doing that one thing. It's taking that first step. Just like any product you build, you just start with that one thing.
that's awesome. And the first steps, where can people find more about you and take that first step with the Story Cycle Genie online?
The first step would probably be a great thing to do, or a fun thing that, well, I think it's fun. You can decide if it's fun or not, but I've had a lot of fun with it. Is we just created what we call the brand story grader, and that is at storycyclegenie.ai,
Oh,
brand
nice.
story grader, and go run your brand through it and see what it says, because it is goes through our 14-point analysis, and it will tell you exactly where you're strong and where you're weak. And we're looking at it from a storytelling perspective, right? So it's not saying you're wrong, that your website's horrible. Just because you score a D in storytelling doesn't mean your website's horrible or that you're not doing good things. That's not what it
Right,
means.
right.
We're purely looking at narrative, right? So context is important there. And then the storycyclegenie.ai site itself is a great place. Check out the platform page. It gives you, an overview of all the different agents that are specialized, that are part of the mesh. For me personally, you can find me on LinkedIn, mostly linkedin.com/in/Sean Schroeder, all one word.
Outstanding. We'll make sure to link all of that in the show notes. And I think that's a great first step is go run your brand through the grader and then take that next step of turning whatever the grade is into, an improvement.
Yeah. And that's the cool thing is like, if you're like, okay, cool. Now I do want to take that next step. It leverages, we save that in the system. So when you come back, you've already taken the first step, right? We've already analyzed, right? And then we use that to build your brand story off of, plus your knowledge, right? So it's pretty neat.
Outstanding. So much value. Sean,
Yeah.
it's been a great conversation. Thanks for being on SaaS Fuel.
Yeah. Thanks, Jeff. Love to be here.
Thanks again, Sean, for coming on the show and sharing your insights and resources. You can learn more about Sean and Happy Ladders at happyladders.com. And of course, every entrepreneur needs a great story. So you can check out storycyclegenie.ai. And it is pretty freaking fantastic. I'm really impressed with what Sean and Park put together. It's really, really cool stuff. So we'll link all of that in the show notes, but remember storycyclegenie.ai. As always, all links, highlights, resources, and full show notes are available at saasfuel.com. And be sure to check us out on YouTube as well. And that's at Champion Leadership. We have full video episodes, training, shorts, reels, outtakes, lots more over there for you. Thought leaders share. Share this episode with a founder who's got 37 tabs open on Chrome right now, and 12 of them are how to raise a seed round. Everyone who shares this week gets a browser extension that closes unproductive tabs and opens a portal to your most focused self. It includes a free trial to Attention Span Pro. I could really use that. I might be one of those that has 37 tabs open. Is your recruiting strategy helping you scale or just slowing you down? Next week, Will Spengler shares how he ditched the bloated agency playbook and built a national recruiting firm that's faster, leaner, and built for today's hiring leaders. If you're scaling a team, this one is essential listening. And after that, 1 week from today, we have Max Sharawala joins us to break down how he's helping startups, unicorns, and enterprises ship smarter using generative AI, modern architecture, and real-world engineering muscle. From billion-scale pipelines to agentic SaaS, Mac delivers where most buzzwords stop. So I will see you next time, and as always, enjoy the journey.
Thanks for listening to SaaS Fuel. Full show notes for each episode, which includes a summary, key takeaways, quotes, and any resources mentioned, are available at saasfuel.com. Be sure to follow and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you're enjoying the content and getting value from these episodes, please leave us a rating and review at ratethispodcast.com/SaaSfuel. We'll be sure to read these out on future episodes.